Ms. Clemens, please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you inviting me here this evening. Not only am I a county legislator, I'm also an educator. So I see this as being a huge issue. The thing that I'm going to focus on, what we're doing with my committee is, of course, over the last few years, access and equity have become a rallying cry of many school districts here in Westchester. So we at the Board of Legislators have put together a committee, and we put it in my committee, Intergovernmental Services, to make sure that we can work on the broadband issues for Westchester. I plan on holding a meeting next week with stakeholders to explore ways that we can help bridge the digital divide and ensure that all Westchester residents have equitable access to broadband and internet. We're starting out with some bills that are being proposed in the state legislature, and we'll be discussing that to start off the topic. With the pandemic, most parents and students are learning and working from home. Quality internet access is no longer a luxury in today's world, it is a necessity. Many times with my own class, which is hybrid, the students sound like that they're underwater. And so I asked them, could they hear me clearly? And they say many times they cannot. They have Chromebooks, we have accessibility for broadband, we've had hotspots, we've done a lot to pay for families to have access, and we still here in New Rochelle are having issues, and it's not an even playing field for students. Flipping a switch in a dark room and the lights turn on, adjusting the thermostat in your house heats up, affordable, reliable access to web is even more important than ever. Families need internet access, availability, reliability, and affordability, which is going to be a very big issue for some families. More competition, lower prices, better service, and service providers will need to hire more people to ensure quality service. We'll be looking at ways to make sure that we have choices for the internet service, ways to make sure that the service will go uninterrupted. Uh, 2 weeks ago, the entire school went out, the entire district went out. This
Mm.
happens frequently where in the middle of a class, it happens like, okay, so in my class, forget my class. They came running down the hall and the tech specialist said the entire district is out. I live very close to the school. I was able to go home, get on my computer and service my students. I have a great 5G situation at my house. I understand the rest of the students were out for the entire day. And the other teachers, some of them live in Connecticut, some of them live in Northern Westchester. They didn't have accessibility to be able to get home and do what I did to be able to, continue to work with the students that day. We need to invest in infrastructure to make sure that storms don't knock out and take people offline. At the county in our capital budget, we have actually put, I think the figure is $85 million that we will be using. But this goes in line with some new housing that the county is going to be doing. Also, it has something to do with some of the new buses that we're going to get. So in terms of the housing that's going to go up, we're trying to look at affordable housing and workforce housing where we make sure that the new structures are completely set up for broadband so families that move in will have accessibility. Internet is one of the few utilities where people don't get service. If they don't get service, there's really no way that they can cope with educational issues. A friend of mine had to take off from her job and take a 3-month leave of absence because her 11th grader was struggling. And right before it's time to go to college, this has turned out to be a huge problem for her family. And so as a parent, she's taken 3 months off to make sure that her child is ready to go to college. And the issues right here in New Rochelle at the high school, and the issues were with having adequate broadband. So I was like, wow, that's amazing. It says, as we want to do this in the right way, working with the federal government, the state and service providers, labor and advocacy groups, They will all need to have a seat at the table, because we won't be able to do this alone. And so that is what we at the board are planning to do. And we hope that we can help close this digital divide and to support people, teachers, students, and families in terms of being able to be well educated and using the internet. It's not just during this pandemic, but it's always. They need to have good access. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Legislator Clemens. That was great. You really pretty much just encapsulated everything, and that pretty much addresses a question that was going to be asked of you. So you cut us off at the pass. So greatly appreciate your time and your due diligence, and just making sure that you continue to advocate for our youth, not only of course in New Rochelle, but throughout the entire county, because there are pockets where unfortunately some of our students are unfortunately suffering at this time.
Right,
Thank
absolutely. So thank you for having me. And if for any of your future things, I will be glad to join you if the topics are relevant. Sorry, I have to leave. I know this is going to be a great panel. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do an introduction of the remaining of the panelists. And what we're going to do is actually do an alphabetical order, and they will have about 45 seconds to a minute to introduce themselves. So we're going to start off with Dr. Mark Biacco, who serves as the superintendent for the Elmsford School District.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. This is a very important time period. I think the discussion that we're going to have this evening is always an important one, but right now with the being in the midst of the pandemic, it is really important that we're there to support students, to make sure that our children are receiving the proper and appropriate mental health support that they need. This is a critical time. I'm very, very happy that Legislator Clemens had brought up the internet access as well. We see that as more and more students are struggling with the remote learning environment, that we need to get them the resources to be successful. And all of these things are critical as we move into, hopefully, a transition back into a in-person instruction in the near future.
Thank you, Dr. Biacco. Next, we will have Jill Bernstein, who serves as the chairperson for the Board of Directors for the Student Advocacy, which is based in Elmsford, New York.
Yeah, thank you, Andre. So this is a very important conversation, and the topic really goes to the heart of our mission. So I thank you for putting this together and hosting this conversation. A little about student advocacy for those of you who don't know us, that we were established in 1982. Our mission is to ensure that students who are struggling in school and at risk for academic failure or dropping out are able to access the supports and the resources that will lead to improved educational outcomes and success, not just academically, but also socially and emotionally. That's important as well. We know that the pandemic has exacerbated issues of equity and access and has widened the achievement gap. And students with disabilities and those with fewer resources are amongst the ones that are hardest hit. And we as an agency at Student Advocacy are here to help them. We have a team of advocates and attorneys who are trained in education law and also have extensive understanding of disabilities and how they can affect a child both in and outside of the classroom. And we are the only low or no cost provider of education advocacy services in the region. So I am just very honored to be part of this panel. Thank you, Andre. And I would like to hear from other panelists regarding how we can partner with you and what role can we play at student advocacy in ensuring that the educational needs of the students in the community are met.
Thank you, Jill. Next, we have Dr. Tahira Dupree Chase, who currently serves as the superintendent for the Greenbrook Central School District.
Thank you, Mr. Early, and greetings to all who are on this Zoom. First, I'd like to thank the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity for putting together such an important panel. Now is the time to have the conversation about public education. You know, before the pandemic, there were issues and concerns with public education, especially as it relates to students of color, students with disability, our immigrant students, our English as new learner students. The pandemic has put on the forefront and exacerbated the issues that already existed in public education. As many people have indicated that there is a rush to get back to normal, I'd say let's stop and let's think about what that means. Normal was not working for our children. So let's talk about a new normal, a new and improved normal. And I'm hoping during this conversation, we'll begin to put a roadmap, if you will, together as to how we can create a new and improved normal for marginalized communities, for children who are underrepresented, for children who need social emotional support, children who have been traumatized by this pandemic, educators who need the support, and let me add, families who will need the support from the schools so that we can live a successful life post-pandemic. So thank you for putting this together. I appreciate your chapter for their work, and I look forward to robust discussions.
Thank you. Next, we have Gina Jackson, serving as councilwoman for the town of Greenburgh, but also the chairperson of the Greenburgh Against Systemic Racism Committee. Councilwoman Jackson.
Thank you very much, Andre, for the Sequoia Commission. Thank you very much, Andre. It's a pleasure to be here and be part of this important discussion. As Andre mentioned, I am the councilman representing Greenburgh and the chair of Greenburgh Against Systemic Racism. One of the committees, we have actually 5 components. It's education, healthcare, housing, employment, and law enforcement. We started with law enforcement so we can meet the mandate for Governor Cuomo's initiative, Reinforming Police. And as we continue to wrap up that report, we're going to begin focusing on the education. And I just want to say clearly, you know, as a board member for the town, we definitely are not trying to step on the toes of the school board. What we want to do is partner. And what I want to do is with this, a part of the task force is partner with the school board and how we can help make change within the school system. And even legislative change, because as we know, the funding, the type of funding that is allocated to our schools definitely are different across the board, but we want to make sure that the appropriate funding is received for students and the school districts in need. So I'm looking forward to hearing and listening and learning from each one of the panelists here. And please, however I can be of assistance, please feel free to reach out to me, and how the task force can be assistance. We really want to partner up and really make some serious, robust change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Jackson. And forgive me, I did say that we were going to go in alphabetical order, and it just so happens that we had to call an audible, being that Dr. Joseph Rica, who serves as the superintendent for White Plains School District, took ill, so he's unable to be with us this evening. But in his absence, we have Dr. Debbie Hand, who serves as the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction for the City of White Plains School District. Dr. Hand.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm also looking forward to the conversation this evening and for learning from everybody on this panel. I think it's a powerful moment to be able to get together and to share our voices and to tell our stories, and to also find some solutions and together, you know, support each other through this work, this very important work. We know that the pandemic has exacerbated many of the inequities that we've known about in education, but now we've been able to see them. Our teachers have been able to see them. Our parents have been able to see them much more clearly. So really having the resources that we need to support every student's learning and to really celebrate the gifts that children bring to us every single day. So I know that there's a lot of questions that we're going to be answering, and I think more information will be coming out of that. But I just appreciate this. And, you know, I like that we started out with the technology component of it. In our district, we made sure that every child had an iPad, excuse me, an iPad in their hands. We distributed iPads to all of our students from a one-to-one standpoint. And we also made sure that they had high-speed internet to the greatest degree possible, but that across the city is different, right? Not everybody has that same access to, full high-speed internet. So there is inequities in that, and just making sure that we are supporting our children to the best of our ability. So thank you again, and I'm ready to talk and I'm ready to listen.
Thank you for joining us at moment's notice. And last but not least, we have Attorney Tejas Sanchala, who currently serves as the Executive Director for Westchester County's Human Rights Commission.
Thank you, Andre. It's nice to be here tonight. Having spent 20 years doing anti-discrimination work as an attorney, it was my privilege to join the Human Rights Commission as Executive Director in 2019 under the leadership of County Executive George Latimer. The Commission, for those who do not know, enforces the Westchester County Human Rights Law and the Westchester County Fair Housing Law and educates the public about their rights and obligations under their law. The Commission is celebrating its 21st year in 2021. I like to say it's 21 and 21. The Commission accepts and investigates and adjudicates complaints of discrimination in employment, housing, and places of public accommodation. The Commission also conducts a robust education and outreach program that empowers the community. The Commission strives for a community that is just and equitable. And while I'm not a school principal or a school administrator, like some of our distinguished panelists tonight, I am a product of the Westchester County school system. I went to Irvington Elementary School, middle school, and high school. And while I was in school, I learned some of American history, but I can tell you, I certainly didn't learn critical parts of American history, such as Juneteenth, the history of white supremacy in America, with events such as the Tulsa Race Massacre, or that there were enslaved people who lived in Irvington. I learned that last piece last year at a community event. I want to thank Andre for organizing this event tonight and inviting me to be part of it. I also want to thank Andre for being a part of the Human Rights Commission. He serves on the Human Rights Commission as a board member and on the Human Rights Commission's Fair Housing Board as a member as well. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you, Tejas. Okay, so we're going to go right into it. And being that Tejas was the last person to pretty much speak, you know what, Tejas, we're gonna start off with you real quick. And the question posed for you, sir. And this actually will fall under for Jill as well as Gina. But how can community-based organizations and agencies such as the Human Rights Commission be a resource to school districts to A, acknowledge educational components that are ingrained into systemic racism, and then B, how to work together to realize equality and equity in education, hiring, curriculum development, leadership, etc.
Thank you, Andre. That's a lot to handle and unpack in one question, but I'll try to do as much as I can and have Jill and Gina follow up. But I can't help but think of the words of James Baldwin, and his words still resonate today. And some people tell me it feels like he wrote some of his work today. But he said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And conversations like tonight are very important because we need to get comfortable having these types of conversations. There should be a more truthful way of learning history and talking about history so we can confront it together. I learned more about what the Nazis did in Germany than slavery and white supremacy when I went to school. I understand it's a lot easier to talk about the evils from other countries, something that happened far away, than what happened in our country. But I think we can learn a lot if we look at what South Africa does, what Germany does. They make an intentional effort to substantively talk about their country's history with slavery and race. And I think it's important we talked about doing that as well. I also want to point out that it's the 67th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Ed. The Supreme Court ordered the states to move with, quote unquote, all deliberate speed. But more than half a century later, there's clearly much work that needs to be done. And we have to remember the federal government played a central role in the 1940s and 1950s in segregating our communities. And there's a study in Long Island, for those who are not familiar with it, called Testing the Divide. And it shows how segregation is in place today. And that segregation directly impacts education and community resources. One of the commission's programs talked about redlining and housing discrimination and the impact on generational wealth today. The median wealth for a Black family is $17,000 approximately, while the median wealth for a white family is approximately $170,000, according to one study. Now, the first step in this work is to really look internally and to look at our own biases before we can do the work externally. So this applies to individuals. It applies to organizations. A school can look inward to determine if it's meeting its goals of diversity and inclusion and where are the areas it can improve. For example, is its curriculum culturally diverse and accurate? So to that end, the commission has been putting on a series of programs in its education empowerment series that's open to the general public. We talked about acknowledging systemic racism and the nation's history of xenophobia. We talked about recognizing and interrupting implicit biases, teaching skills on how to talk to your friends and family about race, how to be an upstander if you see somebody in the community being harassed, and how to be an ally from a majority community to a minority community, between minority communities, and within a minority community. And the programs have included national renowned expert like Reverend Dr. Bryant Marks. We partnered with Kappa Alpha Psi, thank you, Andre, on that program, and other elected officials as well. I think we've done over 8 programs, I want to say, since the murder of George Floyd, and many have been attended by teachers and students. The commission partnered with the Holocaust Human Rights and Education Center last year on a workshop for teachers on talking about hate. Working with community-based organizations, government agencies like the Human Rights Commission increases access to resources and ideas for schools. And the county has a dynamic youth bureau that's led by Dr. Damia Harris Madden, and it's very active in schools as well. And I believe we're going to talk about hiring, so I don't want to get into that right now, but I'd like to just say that right now I think we're at an inflection point, and we're in the middle of a civil rights movement, and the youth play a big role in that moment. And I think current events are a real opportunity for discussion, for growth. Right now, there have been over 3,000 incidents of hate against Asian Americans nationwide. Some have occurred in schools. And this is a time and an opportunity for us to talk about all forms of racism and hate and how they impact our society as a whole. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you, Tejas. Jill or Gina, would you like to add anything to that?
I would just add to that. I think as an elected officials, we take a look at the funding that is received to the schools, that we need to make sure that we advocate for more funding. As we know, in Greenburgh, it's 60% of the tax revenue goes towards the school districts. But if you look at the different areas, so you take a Greenburgh Central 7, and then you take an Edgemont school districts, because of the tax rate and the tax amount, you're going to get more revenue because the property values are higher, as opposed to if you come to Fairview area, you're not going to get, your tax amount is not going to be as great. So we need to figure out a better formula so to ensure that districts like Greenburgh 7 will receive the same funding or more funding than those who have a higher percentage of receiving tax money. So that is actually on my agenda, and which will fall under the education component of the task force.
Thank you.
Excuse me, related to funding, I know that the programs related to the Individuals with Disabilities Act and Title I have not been fully funded. And that money obviously needs to then trickle down. But especially given the effect of the pandemic, I think it's obviously very important that we put some pressure on those that can affect how much money will be put towards these kinds of programs. There's an act that was just the 2 representatives just introduced into Congress, I think for the 5th year in a row, the Keep Our Promise to America's Children and Teachers Act. And that would pave the way to fully fund Title I and the Individual with Disabilities Act, but over the next 10 years. But this, bill has been introduced repeatedly and has the backing of education leaders, civil rights leaders, disability rights organizations, but obviously is still, these programs have still not been fully funded. And that's, I think, extremely important in addressing some of the issues that we're talking about this evening.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a lot to process there, and especially when it comes to funding and what's going on and how tax dollars are really allocated for our school districts, and seeing how the resources are distributed amongst certain municipalities. I'm going to go in this direction. And this one is going to be about access and equity. And I'm going to pose this one to, I guess we're going to go with Dr. Hand. And I believe Dr. Bianco might be able to chime in on this one as well. So here it goes. Over the last few years, access and equity have become the rallying cry of many school districts in Westchester. What are some of the initiatives that your respective institutions are engaging in that are opening opportunities and bridging the gaps?
I think the most important work that we're doing is we're partnering with the NYU Metro Center, and we've been working on equity as a district-wide committee and really taking a look at inside our district, almost an equity audit, if you would, of our policies and our structures and our systems within our school district. And what does that mean? What does access and equity mean? What are some of the systems and structures that we might have in place that aren't providing that same level of access to all of our students? I know one of the things that we did immediately was take a look. There used to be an application process and set criteria for our AP courses. And we opened up that access, that you didn't have to make an application. You have a conversation. If you think that you can do this and you think that you're motivated, that you want to do this, have a conversation with your counselor and give the students the opportunity to take advantage of these advanced opportunities. I think the other piece to that is making sure that all of our students are well prepared to get there. So this starts at the early childhood grade levels. And I just shared a research policy review with our instructional coaches that I meet with them on Thursday morning, and we're going to go over it. And it's really about equity at the early childhood grade levels. And, often we bring children into school, we assess them right away, and then we put them in remediation mode, rather than really seeing this from an enrichment standpoint and a learning standpoint, and what children are bringing to us, working off of that and making sure that we're giving those opportunities to all students. So that's just one concrete example. And that's what makes me think of access and equity, but really taking a look at our policies and looking deep within our district of how we're seeing things, and and how we unfortunately begin to sort children sometimes from very early ages, and how wrong that is, and how we have to make change. So I don't know if Mark has anything else to add, or.
Debbie, I just wish that I went after before you, because I'm going to add much of the same. We too are partnering in Elmsford with the NYU Metro Center, and we're in our second 2.5 years now of work with them. And same thing, a very deep dive into our policies, really extrapolating any of the systemic inequities that may exist within our own policies. And then broadening that to a district level team, and having that district level team not only be trained by the NYU staff, but also do training and serve as turnkey providers. And the important thing here was having student voice on that team. So we have a pretty good cadre of students who represent the student voice on our district equity team. And then that then morphed into a building level teams in each of our schools. And we now are 100% conducting professional development opportunities And these are going to be done over the course of time. So we're looking at a 3 to 5 year period where we're looking at cultural relevance within our curriculum. We're looking at equitable practices within our school policies. We're looking at our disciplinary procedures, how we go about classifying special needs students, how we go about classifying English language learners, and making sure that we have the interventions in place. On the academic front, again, building in that cultural relevance, not just through the cultural framework that exists at the state level, but expanding that and making it our own, and making sure that it's germane to what our students need. And more importantly, giving them, as Debbie was saying, the open access to competitive courses such as AP level courses, or our ACE program, or now ECE program, which is the early college experience. So we've partnered with Westchester Community College. We offer students college level access to courses at the high school level. But this begins early on, and we really need to have those early interventions in place as well. And 3 years ago, we had an amazing opportunity. Thank you to the United Way for funding a big portion of this. And we engaged in a literacy initiative called A2I, which stands for Assessment to Instruction. And what A2I enabled us to do was do these 8-week check-ins. They were basically a dipsticking mechanism where we were able to look at where are students performing and then group them accordingly to make sure that we're addressing their needs. So what we had built in there were those early intervention measures, and the students that needed the most help had the most access to their teacher, which is critical. And lastly, just looking at that internet access and the Chromebooks as well, we went one-to-one just before the pandemic. Obviously, none of us could anticipate this. This was simply luck that we were on a one-to-one platform, but every one of our students has a device in their hand, in their home, for every kid, regardless if there's 3 or 4 students in a household, they all have access to a device. And we also have hotspots for any students who need that high-speed internet access.
Yeah, we did the same as that. That was the same plan that we had as well.
Andre,
you.
if I could just weigh in for 1 second
Please.
with student advocacy. I mean, as you know, as a board member, access and equity are really at the heart of our mission. And 75% of our referrals come from 10 districts. And in those districts, 50 to 75% of families are considered economically disadvantaged. That comes from the state education department data. So we're really looking to achieve equity and access for families who don't have knowledge of the special education system, education law, don't have the ability to navigate the complexities of that system on behalf of their children. So that's really what we're all about, is providing that access and equity by providing low to no cost services for these families, so that they can their children can excel and succeed in school.
That's a true, student advocacy is a true gem, Jill. And I had to deviate, had to digress just a little bit, because in passing conversation, we get referrals. However, now, don't we have a waiting list?
So we do generally have a year-round waiting list. We're working very hard to generate more resources so that we can hire more advocates and more advocate associates, or sort of our version of paralegals. And but right now I can tell you, we have in 2020 we had 519 total cases, 489 total students, because some students we have more than one case for. And currently we have 155 open cases. But everybody, we don't technically have a wait list at the moment, because everybody that has come through our doors has now been provided with an advocate, whether they've started working together or not. I don't know, but this is something that we've been working on for many, many years, is to try to ensure that we have enough people to, meet the need. And the need is enormous and getting larger with this pandemic.
Wow. Thank you. Whew. It's never ending. Um, Dr. Chase, the implementation of social emotional learning has often been reduced to a morning greeting or an unintentional check-in and continues to sit on the bookshelf as a separate curriculum. What plan can you propose to purposely embed the practices of SEL to truly assure that our students and teachers are getting the social emotional support that they so desperately need, including myself?
So I think that's the perfect question for me. Um, you know, when you hear the terminology, social emotional learning, people look at it as the next fad, right? SEL is the next acronym in public education. SEL has to be social emotional learning, social emotional support has to be part of the plan for every school district, and it has to be part of policy procedures. It's who we are, providing that social emotional support. I'm going to speak to two levels. I'm going to speak to what we're doing at the local level in Greenburgh Central School District, and I'm going to speak to a national level on social emotional learning. First, starting with Greenburgh Central School District. I know firsthand so many of my students have faced trauma. You know, the pandemic has hit children of color in a different way than it has hit any other ethnicity. Um, I know my children have lost relatives. I know my children could not see their loved ones being buried properly and having a proper funeral, could not attend. Some students have even indicated that they had to watch loved ones die via FaceTime. That is traumatic for students. Should not happen, and it's not fair. How do you expect for students to focus on math, on science, on learning when they're dealing with trauma? You know, children are coping during this pandemic, and I take my hat off to America's kids for coping during this pandemic. But I will tell you what we've done in Greenburgh Central School District, knowing what we know. We've developed a trauma-informed curriculum. And here's what that means. We're embedded social emotional learning in everything that we do. So with social emotional learning, for my high school students, before they actually log on in the morning, there's an emoji that asks, how are you feeling? Is it a happy face? Is it a sad face? Are you feeling down? Or is something we can help you with? We start the day that way. We have deployed our PPS, which is our pupil personnel team, our trauma team, if you will, to go out into whether the students are virtual or even to go into the classrooms to do check-ins on our students. We have deployed some of our guidance folks, our social worker folk. We have our attendance person who actually go into the homes to find out how kids are doing if we have not seen them. And that's only a very few kids, that is. But on top of that, we have paired children with teachers in our school district to ensure that every child has a responsible adult that he or she can go to should they face social emotional distress. When we closed our doors in March, the Greenburgh Central School District knew that this would be traumatic for our students as well as for our staff. We saw the stress on our staff. And what we did was we created Wellness Wednesdays, where every Wednesday I would meet with my staff, my entire school district, if they so choose, and provide some sort of activity that centers them and focuses on their social emotional well-being. And I teach them social skills. I teach them coping skills. So we call it Wellness Wednesday. And what we did was we deployed some of our staff who knew how to provide yoga instruction, meditation, breathing, art therapy, music therapy, you name it, we did it. Now that we started school in September, we have Feel Good Friday. And Feel Good Friday allows us to decompress. It allows us to come together. It allows us a safe space to have conversations about our social emotional well-being and how we're feeling. We have enlisted several psychotherapists who have become consultants and friends to our school district, who meet with us on Friday, who teach us how to cope, who work with our staff as well as our students. You see, social emotional support is equally as important as academic support for us at Greenburgh Central School District. What most people who are on this panel and who are listening may not know is that I'm also a co-author of a national textbook. I am working on a program where part of the work that I'm responsible for doing is to ensure that social emotional support is embedded in the curriculum and that it's not separate, because if it's separate, it will never happen. So it's embedded in the curriculum through social studies. Right now, I'm working with Chicago Public Schools. and working with the lowest performing school districts in building a program that encourages self-esteem, where students will see examples of themselves, representation of themselves. They're learning about their own history in ways in which they've never learned. It goes beyond slavery. Students are engaged in these tasks where they are building their own self-competence, and they're also learning about others. We're teaching tolerance, we're teaching coping, we're teaching flexibility, we're teaching students how to manage stress. And we're doing this work, and I'm very, very proud. So social emotional support has to be part of the discourse as we're planning opening school full time. Kids will be returning to us having faced trauma, having faced loss, having faced grief. But equally as important, we have to take a deliberate and a conscious effort to make sure that our teachers are well trained to deal with the vicarious trauma. And that's the trauma of their students that they take on themselves, and they learn how to cope and how to deal with it. It is not easy work. Mr. Early, I will not tell you that I have a perfect model. I will tell you that we are all doing our best to cope. And I have to say that even with my administrators, I ask them to find balance so that they can cope. When I have meetings with them, we'll start off with how are you doing? We'll talk about things other than education, just to find that balance. There are things over the weekend and tasks that I give them. We have different strategies that we sort of employ every week to ensure that everyone is balanced and everyone has a healthy balance of their own social emotional support, as well as the work that they have to do. My leaders, my teachers are taking care of elderly family members. They're watching family members pass away. I've had teachers who had both parents pass, husbands sick, spouses sick. And these are the things that we have to deal with, as well as holding teachers accountable to educating our children. So it's important that we have balance in our school district. It's important that within our policies and during our planning sessions that we include social emotional support for the people who are responsible for supporting our children. Just like when you're riding an airplane, the flight attendant will tell you to do what? Put your own mask on first before helping others. And we have to learn how to apply that, because most of the time we tend to work ourselves to the point where we're no good for anyone else at the end of the day.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Chase. You know, it's interesting, the whole concept of a Wellness Wednesday and a Feel Good Friday, not only in our school districts, but should be implemented some way, somehow in our workspace, because some of us are going through, of course, some of this same trauma. And, you know, we need to be there for one another.
You know,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Early, yes, and I just want to add, you know, my thinking behind doing this was really looking at the models of Zappos, looking at some of the models of those very productive, Microsoft, very productive companies. How do they treat their employees? You know, teachers, educators are not robots, they're human. And, you know, I thought about, well, what do they need in order to be more productive and working at their optimum? And people need balance at the end of the day. And we can't forget that our educators have been put in a position during this pandemic in ways in which we've never expected. They have become caregivers in ways in which we've never expected, and they need balance. Otherwise, we're going to lose a fleet of very talented people if we do not take care of them.
To your point, Stephanie Shabman, who's the legal director at Student Advocacy, had integrated a program to address trauma for our advocates in her summer training program for exactly that reason, that they're there and they're experiencing, they're watching their students experiencing this trauma and the effects of the trauma, and they need to be able to hit the reset button and so that they can be there for those students.
Absolutely. You know, vicarious trauma will play a role in your own personal physical health.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had a whole workshop in my school district with our administrators on how do we cope with vicarious trauma. If I'm constantly going to Mr. Early with my issues, you know, family member's sick, I'm sick, you know, I can't pay my mortgage, I'm about to lose my car, you know, I'm going through a divorce, my child is going, you know, is having issues. He's listening to me and he's internalizing that. Now, just think, if in fact he has 20 Dr. Chases coming to him with different issues, a caring leader is going to take in all of that. Do you know what that does to the heart, what that does to the mind, what that does for your respiratory system? I have to keep my staff healthy so that they can be here for my children. That's thinking.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I actually have a question, and I'm going to pretty much infuse another part of another question in here, and it goes back to it's a government question per se, but it also actually be addressed with our educators. And the question is pretty much is why is it that my zip code can determine my future, and how do we change the inequities that have always been there? Schools in wealthy communities have more resources than schools in poorer communities. And I want to tie into this, the resources, because wealthy communities can better prepare their children, let's say for standardized testing. Now, if I don't get enough resources to assist myself in navigating through the wonderful world of standardized testing, which, by the way, standardized testing did not work for me at all. Luckily, I have this thing called common sense. So that's what brought me this far. So how do we determine the future of our youth when they could be sort of kind of like handicapped just because of where they reside?
Mr. Early, if I may, I'm going to go back to some of the comments that were made earlier regarding funding. If we look at the current funding formulas, they're as inequitable as they come. They harm those school districts that have the highest needs. If we go back to the campaign of fiscal equity in 2007, the only year that the CFE was funded with foundation aid was the 2007-2008 school year. After that, the foundation aid decreased, and it was actually frozen for a period of time and then supplemented. So if we want to look at resources, and we truly want to get equity and parity across particularly our county and state, we have to begin with the foundation aid formula. We also have to continue to educate our public to advocate for what is right for their children. We need parent voices in this. We cannot be the only voices advocating for the additional funding. Currently, on the board right now, we're seeing inequities frozen across the board, foundation aid. We're seeing Title I that has still not fully been funded, as Jill mentioned earlier. We're looking at the consolidation of service-based aids. We were asked to share services, and our objective as superintendents of school districts was to basically partner with our BOCES. It is a cooperative service, and utilize that cooperative service. The state is looking to consolidate those aids. So those are things that are going to have a dramatic impact on the inequities, and they're going to further the gap. So if we want to truly start to gain equity across zip codes, we need to begin with the funding formulas because they're currently inequitable.
So I agree with my colleague, Dr. Biacco. We've worked together for over 20 years. And so I share that sentiment, and I am also fighting the good fight for Greenburgh Central School District. It is no surprise that my school district does not receive its lion's share of aid for building aid. My buildings are in disrepair. We actually have the lowest building aid of any district in Westchester County because of a formula inaccuracy that has yet to be rectified. If that's not an equity, I don't know what is. We have brought it to the attention of so many people for so many years, and yet nothing is being done. Yet my students are in old buildings, yet my students have to be moved out of their buildings simply because we don't have proper ventilation. You will not see that in affluent areas. And Mr. Early, you are absolutely correct. When I look at other districts and I compare it to the district where I am currently the proud leader, I look at how parents can afford to get their students, their children tutors. They can afford early childcare. You know, in our district, we looked at what affluent school districts were doing, and we replicated that as much as we possibly can with the resources that we could. Here's what we did. We realized that we had a half-day pre-K program. We know how important early childhood education is for the start of someone's educational tenure. We had a half-day program. By the time the kids got in, took their coats off, had snack, it was time for them to go home. How much learning took place? So we changed that. We now have a full-day program with full programs, full music program, a full world language program, full maths, science. We're exposing the kids to STEAM at the early childhood. When you look at IB, we are an IB designated school district. We are one of 9 districts in the country to have IB at every school. We just installed an IB DP program, which means most of my students will graduate with an IB designation, which is a global designation diploma. We're very, very happy for that. We made sure in our district that all kids had access to it. So maybe not all kids will graduate, but will have access to the program and take at least one course. I am so happy that the majority of my seniors are taking at least one IB course. So they're having that rigorous experience. We brought in world languages. People have said to me, how dare you bring in a world language with children of color? Yes, I was told that, and I didn't care. We brought in Mandarin Chinese. And why Mandarin Chinese? Chinese is going to be the #1 spoken language in the next 10 to 12 years. I wanted my children to have a chance to have global competition so that they can have opportunities that reaches far beyond Westchester County. And so when we try to give our children these rigorous opportunities, and people will call them elitists, when you give children the opportunity to success and you raise the bar high, kids will rise to the occasion. I'm witnessing it at Greenburgh Central School District, where I'm offering the rigorous program. We're doing a great job at that, and kids are rising to the occasion. But we still need the resources. I still don't have what my counterpart districts have in terms of resources. Looking at our buildings, looking at our facilities, looking at just what we get in building aid. Those things need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed soon, because my children do not have another 10 years to wait.
Thank you, Dr. Chase. Thank you. And I know time is winding down, but this is still a spirited discussion, and I want to get back to Tejas. But before I do that, between Dr. Hand or Dr. Biel or any of the superintendents, going back to the standardized testing, do you feel that that is a true measure of a student's ability? Because as we made our way or making our way through this pandemic, and some of the things that are going on, and dealing with the resources, and dealing with the home environment, and standardized testing has been waived to a certain degree. Is that a true measure?
No.
No.
No way. No way.
Alrighty then.
No way.
Not at all. I have students who may not do well on standardized tests, but they're absolutely brilliant. They're not great test takers. I see it every single day. I'll tell you, even as a superintendent with multiple degrees, put me in front of a standardized test, you're not going to get a true assessment of what I really can do. And what standardized tests have done for many of our children, especially our children of color, it has sent them the wrong message. It has sent them a message that they're not good enough. And that is not accurate. We have brilliant children that have other ways in which they can show their brilliance and can demonstrate what they can do. I think we need to look at multiple measures. I think we need to look at project-based assessments. And I think we need to look at other ways in which kids can demonstrate what they know and what they can do.
Yeah, we know that project-based learning is the key to it all. What happens is, I think we have a systems problem. New York State Education Department doesn't have a process by which they can measure a project-based learning assessment. And as a result, and due to lack of trust in the field, in my opinion, we're faced with these standardized tests that are oftentimes inequitable for our kids. We know who is going to struggle on those exams. They're going to be our students with special needs. It's obvious. It's going to be our English language learners. How do we get those students the success that they deserve so that we can get them onto college and functioning very well in society? We know that they're going to be successful. That's not a question for us. What is oftentimes a question for us and where we face a whole lot of frustration is around how do we get them through the standardized test? And that should not be what we're focused on. We should be focused on putting them on a trajectory towards success.
And using formative assessments that are going to then inform our teaching and our learning, but not a standardized assessment that given on one day that's very arbitrary, even for the benchmarks that they've created for our children. So they really don't give us any information, but they give a lot of our children anxiety and a lot of our teachers anxiety and angst. And that's really what standardized testing is right now. And I know that they're not waiving it at the federal level, and they're going to be doing some sort of standardized testing this year, or, New York State is making a decision on that. But I think that they have to be very, very careful, because I think there's a disconnect there. There's a disconnect with everything that you've been talking about, everything that we've been saying tonight, and what's been going on with our families, what, the trauma that some of our children, our teachers have faced, and then to put a standardized assessment on top of that when nothing has been standard about this school year. Absolutely nothing has been standard about the school year.
And then what does that lead to? It leads to a comparison, right? And it's great that we have this transparency. I love it. I love the school report cards. I think they're an actually great portal. But what happens is people go into those portals and they start comparing districts.
Back to the zip code conversation. Right?
It goes back to, that's exactly where I was going with it, Debbie. Thank you.
No, it's very true. I mean, when families move into a particular area, the first thing they look at is what are the standardized test results, and it doesn't give you a true snapshot of a school district. But let's take it another step further. Let's talk about the questions on the standardized test. Do the questions fit our children? So let's take our inner city children who, New York City, when I worked in New York City, and I remember standardized tests, kids who ride the subway and the buses to school, there were questions that were so irrelevant and culturally insensitive to children. So we really have to take a look at the set of questions and who is this test targeted? Is it targeted to a particular set of children, or is it designed for all children?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Don't get us started, Andre. I mean, we're ready.
Obviously.
Talk to educators about standardized testing.
Were we clear on our position there? I don't know.
Crystal clear.
Yes.
I beg the audience's indulgence. I know we're over time right now, but there is an important question that I would like to ask, because we're talking about our educators. Those are the ones that are actually responsible for the day-to-day instruction for our youth. And from a lens, let's say through the diversity and inclusion. And I think Tejas, you might be able to address this one, or feel free for anyone else. In so many communities that are considered hard to serve, the staff, the educators that are hired do not reflect the demographics of that community, nor do they share the values of said community. Why is it important to have a diverse educator workforce?
Thank you, Andre. I was looking at the data, and I'm a big believer in data, and I saw that teachers of color make up less than 25% of the teaching workforce in New York State, while 57% of the students in New York State are not white. Those are 2018 numbers. And we all know having a teacher of the same race or color is vital, not only for inspirational role modeling, but it's also important for creating a sense of belonging. I think when I went to school, I was very much the other. There weren't that many people that looked like me growing up in Irvington. But having a diverse workforce helps building a coaching relationship, expressing empathy, and studies have shown that representation matters. A child is more likely to succeed and have a positive outcome when teachers look like the student population. For example, I don't know if people are familiar with the Johns Hopkins study from 2018 that showed that when Black students are taught by one Black teacher between kindergarten and third grade, that student is 13% more likely to enroll in college. And that number goes up to 32% if that student is taught by two Black teachers between kindergarten and third grade. And I think it also helps to show that racially diverse teachers show the true potential in students. And I think, I don't want to bring in another topic in, but there's probably going to be a topic about who gets into AP classes and who doesn't, who gets recommended for certain opportunities. In one of the programs, actually in the program that we had partnered with Andre, they showed the landmark doll test. And the landmark doll test was used in the 1954 Brown versus Board of Ed case. And most people don't know that test was pioneered by Dr. Clark and Dr. Mamie Clark. They lived in Hastings, and they were Westchester residents. Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King would go to their house. But that study showed the development in the sense of self-esteem in children. The study showed that students who were separated by race had feelings of inferiority as to their status in the community. Children learn from a young age that they need to be about race, and it needs to be discussed so that every child feels valued. And that doll test, by the way, even though it was from the 1940s and 1950s, they recreated it in 2010 on CNN with Anderson Cooper and Margaret Spencer Beale. And she found the students still felt bias. And Ms. Beale stated that we are still living in a society where dark things are devalued and white things are valued. That was 2010. And it's important when we're talking about this work to really do the work and not to be doing it in a performative way and to express outrage or to put in a hashtag. And we've seen some schools, I think this started in Atlanta, where there have been Black at Instagram handles. And I think there's several schools in Westchester that have those Instagram handles. And those are in part because maybe the students don't feel comfortable talking about the issues in the school. But they've also talked about how a racially diverse workforce impacts all students and benefits all students by showing appropriate racially diverse role models. And my hope also is if you have a diverse workforce, maybe you have a diverse curriculum, and people are not coming up to me and telling me, hey, Tejas, did you know about the Tulsa Race Massacre? I learned about it from watching the HBO show called The Watchmen. And that was a seminal moment in our country's history where we used bombers against our own people. And it certainly wasn't, it's not taught often. And one thing that's important to point out is during the hiring process, even well-intentioned people can show their biases. And there have been many studies that show lawyers, orchestras, and there have been studies that talk about if applicants whiten their resume, they get more callbacks and more responses. So we need to start looking at our biases and start to work on ways to interrupt those. There's a lot of other issues with teacher recruitment about a leaking pipeline, college debt, and what it takes. But, I was talking to some friends in anticipation of tonight, and they said, Tejas, this is not just a teacher issue. I've had issues with guidance counselors. In housing discrimination, we see issues where real estate brokers will racially steer some certain community. Maybe you should live in Mount Vernon, not Scarsdale. Maybe, but wait, I could afford to live in both. And I've heard anecdotal stories from friends where their children should consider the military. This really should be something you do. Or I don't know, I think this Ivy League school, that's a little bit out of your reach. SUNY Albany, no offense, SUNY Albany, but is maybe more in your reach. And then, I don't want to pick on schools. Lack of diversity is not just an issue in schools. We saw the CEO of Wells Fargo recently be asked, why don't you have more of a diverse leadership? And he said, well, there's a limited pool of Black talent. That's why. And he quickly apologized, but he said, that reflected my unconscious bias, but it goes to show you what his company's view at that point in time was on diversity. So I think there's many reasons and the importance of a diverse educator workforce, Andre.
And thank you, Tejas. And to your point, I really truly took offense to that statement because that means that individual never stepped foot on the campus of a historically Black college and university. But we're not going to go down there, right, Dr. Chase? Did anyone have any other input on that one?
No, you said it all.
You said it all.
You said it all.
He hit it. He hit it.
You hit it right the head on the nail. Yes.
Yes.
I just want to mention that this Saturday, we do have a diversity teacher recruitment fair that's going to be a virtual fair across many of our districts. So the last time I checked, we had 536 plus applicants to that fair. I know that for our district alone, we have 90 like meet and greet interviews scheduled for Saturday afternoon. So I just wanted to put a shout out there and thank you so much. I really appreciated everything that you had to share today. And Dr. Chase, I loved how you said that SEL is who we are. Like, I think that was very powerful because it is. Like, SEL is who we are.
And I would like to say thank you very much, Dr. Chase, from a mother who, my son. The Wednesdays are helpful, the Fridays are helpful. So thank you so much for all that you bring to Greenburgh Central 7. I keep saying 7. You can tell how old I am, right? Because 7 is gone now. How many years ago? So I'm a product of Greenburgh Central 7.
Dating your age.
So I have to, I have to stop. So Greenburgh Central School District, so forgive me. But thank you. And thank you to all of you. What I've learned tonight has helped me position where I want to go with the education committee and the task force. And I welcome you, please, to join once we get started, because we need to hear from you. We need to see how we can partner together and how to make the necessary change. Because I can say it as a parent, I can speak to it as an elected official now and seeing what needs to be done behind the scenes, but I need you to help me make that happen. So I welcome you to please come and join. And as soon as we get the committee up and running, I will be tapping on you. So don't dodge my call.
And thank you, Councilwoman Jackson. And before we wrap up, I would like to pose just one more question. And keep in mind, I had about close to 30 questions submitted, and I think we made it to about 6 or 7. But this is truly a worthwhile discussion. And to that end, and this is open for anyone to answer, but I could see Councilwoman Jackson or Jill having some type of input in regards to what are important policy changes that individuals can advocate to advance racial justice within our educational system.
The removal of redlining. The removal of redlining, because that's where the issue is. The zip codes. And when we talk about funding and zip codes, and as I mentioned earlier, the funding, and I haven't understood, I don't understand why, if the funding is based on the property values, that those families get more money than the families that are in the lower value properties. And it doesn't add up to me. So I don't understand. And this lends its hands to resources, because again, those families have more resources as opposed to those in lower income areas. So it's a matter of that we really change the red line, that we change that zip coding, that when you go and talk to your elected officials and you move into different sections, look and see where your districts are. They're meeting on this, they're talking about this all the time. Parents, advocate about where the monies for your funding for your schools are going, because that's what's going to help myself. That's what's going to help the superintendents on this call to continue to fight. We need to make sure that we hear more from the parents. So it's really goes down to redlining, and they do it all the time, still to this day.
And Councilmember Jackson, I'm going to echo what you're saying and add to that. We have foundation aid formulas that are seriously flawed. When we look at some of our wealthier districts throughout the county, they're over 100% of their foundation aid funding. How is that? How is it so inequitable that we cannot come up with an algorithm that is going to better serve the communities in need? So these are things that I think we need to continue to partner together, and you're absolutely right, and continue to advocate for, because they need to hear our voices on behalf of our kids.
Thank you. Anyone else?
One thing I would just add is that one of our board members, Karen Blumenthal, who had been on staff for a very long time, many decades, was the policy advocate, and she was very involved in the Solutions Not Suspensions initiative, which I think was, continues to be very important because suspensions, they're not delivered. I want to say delivered equitably. Black males are suspended at a much higher rate than and really anyone else. And I think this is an issue that we need to continue to be on top of and address. And looking at solutions. She was part of a big task force. Karen was part of a big task force that was looking at what are the ways that we can, instead of pulling kids out of school for behavior that has been seen by a teacher as inappropriate, how can we keep them in school and keep them engaged? And I think that's something that we need to continue to keep our eyes on and be very vocal about.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for being with us this evening. I'm going to paraphrase what someone just put in the chat box. We're discussing systemic racism. We're dealing with a system that, is designed the way it's supposed to work against individuals in regards to being the haves and the have-nots.
Absolutely.
So we need to make sure that we continue the fight to make sure that we can provide a better sustainable future for our youth, and that's it's going to take all of us to accomplish this goal. With that being said, and before we leave out, just want to Tejas, thank you for the special shout out to Dr. John Henry Clark, who just happened to be a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. Had to throw that in there. But as stated, we were here to discuss the impact of systemic racism and how some of these components impacts every facet of our lives. I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Rochelle-White Plains Alumni Chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. Just thank each and every one of the panelists as they are entrenched within the field of education, diversity, and inclusion. So with that being said, thank you. Join us next month, March 23rd, same time, as we will have invited panelists addressing health disparities. Thank you again and have a safe evening and remainder of the week. Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
Great.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Andre,
Job
will
well
this be
done, brother.
available
Thank you, everyone.
Andre, will this be available for public consumption?
Yes, it will. It will. A link will go out as soon as we do our proper editing and things of that nature, and it will be made available to the public.
Okay, I just have to give a shout out to my basilisk of Eta Omega Omega Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She is on the line. Thank you very much for allowing that.
I have to give a shout out to my support
I'm about to say-
of my Delta Sigma Theta sorority sisters. Thank you for your support. Love you, my sisters. Mwah. All right, I have to jump to another meeting. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love the Divine Nine. You can't go away. Everyone, thank you. This was a
Andre.
blessing. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
You guys
Thank
made
you.
this a success.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.
Nice job, Andre.
Good
Great
night.
job, Dre.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
job.
Excellent job, Dre. Excellent job.
Brother Early, man.
Hey, great job.
Great job.
Sent you one that's 8 minutes away and not in workplace.
Where is it?
In Scores, Terry.
Nice job.